Our sense of smell, a sense that seemed to become less important through human evolution, but is now resurfacing as a very important target for us to potentially promote our memory and performance. Tune in for all the details only here on the People Scientist podcast. You are listening to the People Scientist, the podcast dedicated to helping us optimize our health with the latest scientific findings on neuroscience, physiology, and nutrition. I, your host, Dr. Stephanie Caligiuri, a nutritionist, physiologist, and neuroscientist, will be here with you every single week, bringing us information to ignite our thinking, to help us be one step closer to the healthiest we can be. Hello, my People Scientist Army, and welcome back to the People Scientist podcast for episode 73, where every week I arm us with some scientific evidence so we can all be a little bit healthier and smarter every day. So how are you? How is your day going today? If you had a Labor Day weekend last weekend, how was it? I had a nice weekend for Labor Day. I did some dancing outdoors and I went to Governor's Island for the day on Sunday. If you have never been, Governor's Island is like a hidden gem in New York City. It's a little island right in between the Statue of Liberty and the Freedom Tower on the southern tip of Manhattan. It is very peaceful and very laid back. So that was a nice little day trip for me and a nice change from the busy concrete jungle of Manhattan. Otherwise, I've been busy in the lab. I have 4 projects I'm leading in the lab right now. Some of you have asked about the type of research I do and to talk about that. So very briefly, I study the brain in the context of eating, addiction, and mental health. So for example, I study alcohol addiction, nicotine addiction, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and how what we eat can impact our brain. When my findings are published in peer-reviewed journals, you can bet that I will dedicate some episodes specifically to my work to share that with all of you. But how about we jump into today's episode? I came across some studies published in the last few months that investigated the neuroscience of our sense of smell and how smell seems to be the one sense that activates our memory the most. Why is that? And can we use our sense of smell to enhance our memory then? For example, if we are studying or want to delay or prevent dementia or Alzheimer's, can we have some strategies that can act as a treatment? Can our sense of smell be targeted as a treatment? So let's get into the studies to find out. Now, as we always do, let's start off with some core takeaways. Our sense of smell may be more powerful than we think. Have you ever smelled a familiar scent and got sent back in time to a very strong memory? Perhaps an emotional memory, like remembering a loved one. For example, like your mother's perfume or the scent of your grandparents' home. Well, these personal accounts of smell and memory are supported by clinical trial evidence. For example, when people were presented with a familiar odor, the odor activated regions in the brain that regulate emotion and memory. And the odor did this more powerfully than a visual or auditory cue of a memory. In particular, the odor seemed to evoke emotions more strongly as well. Many clinical trials have shown that our sense of smell is a very powerful predictor of memory loss as we age. An even better predictor than our sense of sight or hearing. Some clinical trials have shown that the addition of odors may help people recall memories and also enhance memory formation during tasks. Now, why might this be? Well, the part of our brain that controls our sense of smell is connected to regions of our brain that control our memories and emotions. As a result, even though as humans we have evolved to rely on our other senses more so. It appears that our sense of smell is very important in regard to our memory, which I think is vital in the context of work performance, as well as reducing the severity of dementia or cognitive decline. So now, let's get into those important details. The sense of smell is the oldest system in evolution that animals have in order to learn about the world around them. But as humans evolved, our sense of sight became more dominant over our sense of smell. However, many scientists claim that our sense of smell is still very much linked to our more primitive brain regions, like the limbic system, that regulates our emotions. In 2006, Willander and Larson conducted a really interesting clinical trial. They recruited 93 older adults and conducted an experiment where the older adults were given 3 different types of cues, either visual, words spoken, or an odor. The scientists wanted to see which cue would cause the participants to recall memories better. The scientists noted that, interestingly, the odor cue seemed to allow the participants to recall memories of their childhood, memories of when they were typically younger than 10 years old. These memories evoked by the odor seemed to be very powerful and emotional, whereas the visual or word cues seemed to bring back more recent memories that were less powerful and less emotional. So this study suggested that odors specifically may bring back emotional memories of when people were young. That when we smell something, the memory of that odor gets stored in our brain differently versus visual or auditory cues. But why would this be the case? Well, Hertz and colleagues in 2004 conducted a functional MRI scan of participants' brains while they looked at or smelled a scent that was personally significant to them. For example, their mother's perfume scent. The goal was to understand if seeing versus smelling the scent had different effects on brain activity, particularly in parts of the brain that regulate memory and emotion. As you may have predicted, the smell of the perfume elicited a far greater recruitment of brain regions involved in memory and emotion, such as the hippocampus and the amygdala, versus the sight of the perfume and versus the scent of unimportant or common or unknown smells. So the scientists concluded that our sense of smell is more powerful than our sense of sight in regard to emotional memory recall and activation of the relevant brain regions. Arshamian in 2012 conducted a very similar study and noted the same results. When comparing words related to a memory versus the odor of a memory, the odor more strongly activated regions involved in memory like the parahippocampus and regions in the limbic system that regulate emotions. So what do you think of that? Do you think that if you smelled something common from your past, like the scent of your grandparents' home, or the scent of a common meal that someone would make for you, that would entice a stronger memory and a stronger emotional response versus seeing or tasting the meal? I think personally I can relate to that too. I've experienced some things where there's a very unique scent, like someone's cologne or perfume, or a scent of a soap. And when I smell that it brings back a lot of emotions and memories. Well, the answer to why that happens is rooted in neuroscience. The brain region that responds to and controls our sense of smell is the olfactory bulb. The olfactory areas run from the front part of our brain to the back of the brain and have direct connections to the brain regions that regulate our emotions and memories, like the amygdala and hippocampus. Neuroscientists have therefore thought that because of the close proximity and direct connections to these memory and emotion brain regions, that this is why smell is the strongest sense that evokes emotions and memories. By contrast, some other senses like sound and touch do not necessarily have the same direct connections to these emotion and memory brain regions. So if our sense of smell is linked so strongly to our memory, it must be important in the context of cognitive decline, like in dementia. Well, the study that motivated me to do an episode on this topic was published just a couple weeks ago in the journal Frontiers in Neuroscience. The scientists conveyed very well how our sense of smell is a very important and overlooked biomarker for aging of the brain. A lot of attention has been put on measuring our vision and our hearing as we age. However, very little focus has been put on our ability to smell. Now, because of the important link that has been made here between memory, emotion, and smell, many scientists are saying that we need to pay more attention to our sense of smell, particularly in the context of memory decline like in dementia. I thought it was really interesting that a lot of studies have shown that our sense of smell seems to peak at the age of 40 years old. Often we think that maybe we may peak at like our 20s or 30s, but not our sense of smell. That tends to peak at the age of 40. Then our sense of smell tends to decline after the age of 65. So what some scientists are suggesting is that our sense of smell is an even more accurate and specific marker for brain aging or risk of dementia. So how do we measure our sense of smell? Well, for example, we have vision tests, like at the optometrist's office. We have hearing tests for different sounds to see if we need a hearing aid. Similarly, there are easy tests to see if we can detect a scent and distinguish a scent, or be able to determine the strength or power of a scent. So scientists wanted to use these simple scent tests as a way to examine our sense of smell as early biomarkers for brain aging and dementia. If this is possible, if our sense of smell could be used to predict our risk for dementia, then we can use these tests as a way to identify who needs early intervention in order to prevent memory loss. Well, in the journal Neuropsychology in 2018, scientists followed a group of 408 older adults to identify if their sense of sight, hearing, or smell would be a better predictor of their cognition, memory, or risk for dementia. After following these participants for several years, all of their senses declined with age. But their sense of smell was by far the most accurate predictor of declines in cognition. For example, if their sense of smell declined over time, their risk for cognitive decline increased. This has been replicated across several clinical trials. For example, in 2018, in nearly 200 patients with Parkinson's disease, those who had a poorer ability to smell on a scent discrimination test were more likely to exhibit declines in their cognition over the next 7 years versus those who did better on the scent discrimination test. Other trials support these findings as well. However, it is important to note that these are associations. So we don't know if a decline in sense of smell impairs memory, or if the decline in sense of smell is a consequence of memory loss. What I think more so we can take from these clinical trials is that measuring our sense of smell should be considered a standard practice in our routine checkups. For example, if a below average sense of smell is observed, or a decline in sense of smell is observed, early intervention to promote memory and to prevent cognitive decline should be implemented. Our ability to smell, of course, can be impacted by other things. For example, if we smoke, if we have chronic rhinosinusitis, a cold, for example. So these would impair the ability for these tests to be accurate. So that is something important to keep in mind too. So where do we go from here? So we realize now that assessing our sense of smell might help predict dementia or cognitive memory decline. But can we use our sense of smell as a way to promote our health or memory? This is what I think most of us want to know and what is important. Well, luckily, some trials show some promising results. For example, Glashit and colleagues last year conducted a clinical trial in 26 patients living with Alzheimer's disease to see if odors could help participants recall memories. This study also included 28 patients without Alzheimer's that were age and lifestyle matched to the other participants. These study participants were asked to recall 2 childhood, 2 adulthood, and 2 recent memories, with and without the presence of an odor. In this study, the odor was coffee, a scent that was familiar to all the participants, but not necessarily linked to any of their memories. Interestingly, in the presence of the smell of coffee, the patients with Alzheimer's were able to identify and recall more memories versus when the odor was absent. Specifically, nearly double the memories were recalled with the coffee scent. But the scientists did not see this effect in participants without Alzheimer's. Isn't that fascinating? Well, based on the fMRI studies I mentioned earlier in this episode, the reason why this may happen is because a familiar scent may activate certain brain regions involved in memory. And perhaps the reason why their ability to recall memories was easier. El-Haj and colleagues in 2018 conducted a very similar study, but they added an additional group of participants that listened to music with no odor while trying to retrieve a memory. It turns out that yes, music or an odor, which was coffee and vanilla in this study, both helped to evoke memory recall in patients with Alzheimer's disease. But the odor of coffee and vanilla seemed to be more effective than the music. What was even more interesting was in the absence of music or an odor, the participants had to work harder and use more executive, higher-level thinking in order to recall the memories. Whereas with the presence of the coffee and vanilla scent, the memory retrieval appeared to be more automatic. So this is really interesting. So what does this mean then? What are the implications? Well, for example, if we by chance have a loved one that is living with memory loss, perhaps adding a familiar and pleasant scent to them may improve their memory recall. But how about for new memories? Can we use smell at the time of trying to memorize something in order to improve our memory? Well, some trials have investigated this. For example, in a virtual reality video game, scientists aim to see that if they added a scent during the game playing, if it would help the players recall the environment better. The scientists compare this versus game playing with no scent. It turns out that adding a scent to game playing did indeed improve memory recall of the game environment. For example, when comparing the participants' memory recall during versus after game playing, if there was no scent present, the participants' ability to recall the memory dropped by 10 points. But if a scent was added to gameplay, their memory of the environment dropped by only 2 points. That's an 8-point difference. Now, I was trying to find some studies where, for example, students would be studying for an exam with a scent present or not, and to see if that would impact their performance on an exam or memory recall. But for some reason, I couldn't find any, which is surprising because I would imagine that something like this would have been conducted. So if you come across any of those studies, please let me know. I would love to read them and share them with everyone. But I would think that this scenario is possible. For example, while studying, if someone were to have a unique scent, like peppermint, for example, and they would smell the peppermint while studying, and then when writing the exam, have the peppermint odor be present as well, I would think that this may have some potential benefits on memory recall, based on all the other clinical trials conducted. Now, the neuroscience of how odors may enhance memory formation was investigated in the Journal of Neuroscience in 2018. Scientists asked participants to smell odors by breathing in through their nose or through their mouth. Now, why the comparison of nose versus mouth breathing? Well, breathing in through our nose allows the olfactory neurons and olfactory bulb of our brain to be activated. Now, these signals then travel from the olfactory bulb to the piriform cortex, then to the hippocampus to allow for memory formation. If we breathe through our mouths, it seems that this pathway is not activated. And so this was tested in humans. The ability to recall the memory when smelling the scent through the nose was more prominent versus when breathing through the mouth. The scientists conclude that breathing in through our nose is important during the critical period where memories are reactivated and strengthened. So I think many different scientists across many different types of clinical trials have provided strong evidence that our sense of smell through our nose is very strongly linked to our memory, and we might be able to take advantage of this connection in order to promote better memory formation and better memory recall. So that is a wrap, my people scientist army. In brief summary, the regions in our brain that respond to odors or scents are directly linked to our brain regions that regulate our emotions and memory. Many clinical trials have shown that odors activate these brain regions more powerfully than sounds or visual cues. Odors may help recall of memories in patients with dementia and may help memory formation during tasks. Because sense of smell has been linked to cognitive decline and dementia, I think using our sense of smell as a way to promote memory and cognition is a fascinating and promising new area of treatment. So, for example, adding a unique scent while trying to memorize something and using that scent to help memory recall could be a possible strategy. Or using a familiar scent while having a conversation with a loved one that has memory loss may help with their memory recall. What do you think? I would love to hear your thoughts. So I hope this episode was thought-provoking for all of you. I know I found it to be very interesting. I always love it when we can understand our brain better. And as a result, with that understanding, comes some unique strategies to promote our health and our performance. So I hope you all have a wonderful, happy, and healthy week. Make sure to follow me on social media where I post extra information on the week's topic. My social media handles are in the description box to this episode. If you liked this episode or didn't like it, whichever, and if you happen to listen on Apple Podcasts, which I know most of you do, then please, if you could take a few seconds to rate and review the podcast so that others may find out about the show and become a little smarter and healthier with every week's episode. I look forward to meeting you all back here the same time and same place next week on the People Scientist Podcast. Bye for now. I am a scientist simply sharing scientific evidence. Some of the clinical interventions I discuss are not appropriate for everyone. Before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle, please do consult the advice of your physician or dietitian. My opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of Mount Sinai Hospital and its affiliates.